All right, this will be a part two right now, I guess.
Stark referenced Doctor Strange's Jimmy Kimmel bit when they first met.
What is your job exactly besides making balloon animals?
Peter enlists MJ and Ned. Ned asks Doctor Strange,
"How did you know you were made of magic? Because my Nana says that we have it in our family, and sometimes I get these tinglings in my hands."
You should talk to your physician.
aha, and later Nana's home
I
has
didn't
a
even catch
display
that. I didn't even catch that he said that in the movie. That's actually pretty cool. You know.
of ancient blades, and Ned successfully operates the sling ring, which surprises Strange. So yes, it really does seem like Ned might have a future as a sorcerer in the MCU. Then down in the Undercroft, there's all kinds of creepy goodies. A doll turns its head at them. In the fridge are a bunch
What?
of creatures, a floating eyeball
What?
in a
I
jar.
didn't even notice that, bro. What the fuck?
A
That's so
claw
cool.
creeping out from under foil. MJ finds a goatee guard that Strange must use to get his goatee perfectly shaved. And then MJ
That's
goes
funny.
on TikTok to find people on homemade gliders replicating Green Goblin. Another with a frost giant cosplay that reads, "I am the Green Elf." And then at the end of this, they're finally able to track down Electro, where Peter also finds Sandman battling Electro with his suit turned.
The fighting in this is so good. Like I love like Spider-Man's fighting style, and I think that's why people love Spider-Man, just because of his fighting style. Like he has to, like he's just like a regular person, I guess you can say that, but he has like extreme superpower, like super strength that he could swing, right? And also his Spidey sense. Like what other powers does Spider-Man have? Spidey sense, super strength, and he could just, he has his web. Even though his web is like a gadget, so it's really just I don't know, but I mean, you get what I'm saying though. Miles Morales actually has more powers, and I'm excited for Miles Morales to get into the series, and I talked about it in my last video, but man,
Inside Out.
I'm excited.
Sandman helps Peter because they were on good terms at the end of the 2007 film, but
See, I don't get that. So what timelines are they pulling these people from? That they just pulling from the specific timeline that they want it to come from? It's so weird, like because then they brush it off saying like, "Oh, Toby's so much older," and I know he might go over it. So hopefully he does. But then Sandman respects Peter at the end of the Spider-Man 3, literally at the right of the end, right? So they grabbed him from that time period.
Metro Jamie Foxx now has a new body looking a bit cooler, and while Dr. Connors later calls it out since they didn't know each other while they worked at Oscorp in the same continuity, this new body is never really explained in the movie. Meanwhile, Willem Dafoe, Norman Osborn, my favorite actor in this movie, argues with his goblin helmet, just as he
Willem
would in
Dafoe
the
did
2002
great.
film, but the argument ends with him shattering the helmet, but even after it shatters, the goblin voice laughs, meaning breaking that helmet did not destroy the identity, it just fused it into Norman's soul. Notice the framing of this broken mask as Norman walks away matches the framing of Tobey Maguire Peter leaving his suit behind in the garbage can in the 2004 film, but in both cases, the characters get dragged back into the game. You know, as I am looking for all these details, I like to keep my snack game going, but I'm tired of the same old snacks, which is why I have turned to Box Suit.
Yeah, you got your
Suit
hustle.
is
Box
limited.
Suit, that's
These
where
little
it's at.
gummies, these are so good. Look at the comics and the games. Someone tagged the sign out your subscription. Peter returns
go.
to the Feast facility. That's the homeless center where Peter works in the comics and in the games. Someone tagged the sign outside with "Mysterio was right" and a green circle over Peter's head, just like Mysterio's fishbowl helmet. Inside, Norman plays a convincing, mentally disturbed man saying, "Someone's at my house. Oscorp doesn't exist. My son." And he trails off, referring to Harry
I
Osborn.
mean, but like we know that, like how Green Goblin is, though, and it's so cool, like knowing it. Like everybody knows in the theater, right? But like knowing how he is, and Tom Holland doesn't, or like and also Aunt May.
Of course, but also telling us that Oscorp, at least any company named that, is not currently in the MCU anywhere. Notice how he wears a green coat over those purple sweats. Goblin
And you can
colors.
still see his
Meanwhile, Aunt
his
May's
suit.
costume is worth looking at. She's wearing a blue jumper with a red sash that could be foreshadowing the bloody wound that causes her death. Aunt May tells Peter to help Norman. Peter says this isn't my problem, which she gets mad at him over because it recalls Tobey Maguire Peter's fateful decision not to intervene, which led to Uncle Ben's death.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
J. Jonah Jameson's upgraded Daily Bugle show, which is really thanks to his Spider-Man coverage, now pushes supplements, which is another jab at Alex Jones. The Chiron reads, "Why does Spider-Man hate national monuments?" recalling the Washington Monument in Homecoming and Tower Bridge in Far From Home. Meanwhile, Otto Octavius recalls the moment he warped, saying he had Spider-Man by the throat, so this must have happened right before Tobey changed
it's
him
weird.
in this moment in the film.
These things have turned you into something you're not. Don't listen to them.
It was my dream.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams.
You're right.
Meanwhile, Max talks about being absorbed into the grid, about to turn into pure energy, recalling the Amazing Spider-Man 2 when Peter and Gwen hardwired Electro to that grid and overloaded his chip. And then Lizard asks Max if he dies, but he never gets an answer, and that's because Lizard doesn't actually die in the 2012 film. He ends up locked up and approached to join a future Sinister Six. So Strange shows them the box, the Machina Dichotomus, in Latin roughly the division machine, which he could use to send them back to their universes. But Peter and Strange debate over this. Strange says, in the grand calculus of the multiverse, their sacrifice means infinitely more than their lives. The subtext, of course, being his guilt for sacrificing Tony Stark as part of his complex calculus from seeing 14,605 future outcomes to defeat Thanos. If you think about it, calculus was also the type of arithmetic on He Who Remains chalkboard. And I just find it interesting that Peter...
And I think that's why in Multiverse of Madness, like Doctor Strange obviously is the protagonist and the antagonist. So maybe Doctor Strange will just die in the next Doctor Strange movie. I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, you have Scarlet Witch in there, and you have the other bit, whatever her name is, but it's like she's another Marvel character, so it'll be pretty cool.
Overcome Strange by doing simpler
It's
geometry.
gonna be cool.
It's still super nerdy, just not overthinking it, doing as much 4D chess as those guys are. So Peter snatches the box, and Strange pursues them, trapping him between portals so that he whips
The
his
suit is
foot.
so
I
cool
love it.
too.
But then he brings Peter back to push his astral soul from his physical body, similar to how the Ancient One did to him. However, Peter's soulless physical body still manages to evade Strange. Interesting.
So
this
cool,
must
bro.
be a higher form of the Spidey sense, which would be a neurological
No,
reflex.
it shows you it's not even a higher form of the Spidey sense because his soul is outside of the body. It is just his body doing it. Like it's just his body. So it shows that his body on his own has a Spidey sense. I mean, if he's outside of it, he might be smart too. I mean, we don't know, obviously, but he obviously he is. I mean, he's still a smart person. Peter Parker's still a smart person, and how easily he just gets back into his body is just good too. I mean, it's crazy though to think about.
That is divorced from Peter's conscious mind, but it also shows us how this is really linked to a kind of metaphysical magic. And later in the movie, Andrew Garfield Peter does say magic's real here too, so he might be aware of that link as well. Strange sends the Cloak of Levitation after Peter, giving us that what if Spider-Man became the Sorcerer's
I love Andrew Garfield in this. Like I talked about it in my review, but like I love them.
Supreme image from the comics that we also saw in the zombie episode of What If. I love this detail. On a nearby newsstand are People magazines with Liz Allen, Peter's crush from Spider-Man Homecoming, daughter to Adrian Toomes' Vulture, calling Peter a liar, showing us that family, including
shit.
Vulture, is still somewhere in the multiverse and gonna show up in Morbius. Don't know how that's gonna make sense. Strange traps Peter in the mirror dimension. The VFX are incredible. Peter tumbles past the High Line in New York City, which Kate Bishop actually just recommended to Yelena and Hawkeye. He tumbles through a department store where you can hear Christmas music playing. Peter tumbles toward the Bethesda fountain in Central Park. It actually looks like the Angel of Water statue might have, like the Statue of Liberty, been swapped out for an Avenger. Strange traps Peter in an endless loop of portals, creating the illusion of infinite Spider-Men, as there are. And then Peter recognizes from the Archimedean spiral that he can geometry the shit out of this and trap Strange in a web of math. And again, if you want a way to really celebrate this awesome magic versus math moment, you gotta get your hands on our exclusive Strange Entanglement shirt at newrockstarsmerch.com. Norman offers to help Peter, saying, you know, I'm something of a scientist myself. Of course, this line from the 2002 movie.
Yeah.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Peter and Ned do their recurring
Willem
handshake.
Dafoe is just like he plays like these characters so well. I wish he would actually be in more stuff and actually play like the bad guy in more stuff, you know. Because he's just so suave with
It
stuff.
ends with the sling ring sparking a bit, a little sign that Ned does have a kind of inner magic to him. Peter takes them to
didn't notice
Happy's
that. Wow.
condo. The security feed glitches as Electro passes from its interference, and then Otto snaps, I don't need fixing, especially by some teenager using scraps in a bachelor's junk drawer. It's not a drawer full of scraps, it's a box of scraps! On the walls of Happy's room, you can actually see the name Slott. That's a reference to longtime Spider-Man writer Dan Slott. Peter activates a Stark Tech fabricator. We saw this kind of device used on the Stark jet to design his new suit in Far From Home. It's powered by an arc reactor. This is a familiar design. This is the new Element Arc Reactor Mark I with the triangular inlay that Tony Stark constructed
I feel
using.
like, you know, I know Tom Holland, like his Spider-Man is supposed to be like, you know, kind of like a bimbo Spider-Man. And I was arguing with somebody about this too, but like, and I was agreeing to the side that he is a bimbo Spider-Man. But how did he not just like, okay, I'm bringing this electric dude in here, and this is the most powerful source of electricity ever. Maybe I shouldn't have it out in the open, you know? It's just a thought.
using the new element he rediscovered in Iron Man 2. I love that this is the era of arc reactor he used because in Spider-Man Homecoming, they specifically had the Mark 42 armor that was using that same generation of arc reactor from Iron Man 3 on the Stark jet. So that would be the one that Happy still has in his possession. Meanwhile, Otto and May share some water in the kitchen. They did briefly date in the comics. Then Peter designs a new inhibitor chip for Doc Ock to replace the one that got fried in the 2004 film, and he puts in place these 6 needles that go into Otto's skin and fuse with the spinal cord. I love how they use the same exact production design from the Raimi films for all of these pieces of technology. They really clearly did their homework to look at how all of these things function. At this point, the red lights on Doc Ock's claws flicker back to bluish white, and he transfers the nanotech back to Peter to give him this golden spider, 8 arms, just like his own. It's like giving him a badge of honor there. Otto encourages his buddy Norman that he's about to rid himself of his darker half, but Norman, facing away from him, says, "Just me." And Defoe uses his darker.
You should know this by now, like just me. Like you should know that it's him.
Voice in this moment,
that it's not him.
His only goblin in his mind right now. And so Peter's Spidey sense kicks in, and he just kind of wanders around the condo. It's super creepy.
Yeah, it's cool.
As it begins, the first person to appear in his periphery is Norman Osborn, and the first thing Peter says is, "May." It's his instinct telling him that Norman will pose a fatal threat to May. And so Peter whips Norman to dummy, which as they came into the condo, you can see Norman in the background casing. So Goblin makes his case to the other villains. These are not curses, these are gifts. Recalling the final lines of the 2002 film, the lesson that Tobey Maguire Peter learned.
This is my gift, my curse.
When Peter had to rationalize his powers as both a gift and a curse, the fight breaks out. Peter punches Goblin, and Goblin just smiles more and more. He is loving it.
Yeah.
Combat is just so brutal. Apparently, Willem Dafoe insisted on doing as many stunts as he could himself. And downstairs, Goblin's glider strikes May, and now that creepy face is covered in a
I
hobgoblin style
love that
hood.
shit,
He
bro.
tosses
Like just look at him. He's so fucking weird.
pumpkin bomb, which Peter bats away, showing how this goblin is just as willing to bomb an Aunt May as he was in the 2002 film. And as she dies, May says the immortal words of Uncle Ben, "With great power, there must also come great responsibility." Yeah, there was a slight rewording, and that's because she said the original comic wording of the line that includes "there must also come" directly from Stan Lee. Folks, that hit hard. So to cheer us up, Ned uses the sling ring to portal to one of the other Peter Parkers currently in this universe, Spider-Man Andrew Garfield, a guy no one will ever believe again in interviews. Notice the music in this moment is actually James Horner's Young Peter theme from the Amazing Spider-Man film in 2012. And we just gotta pause and appreciate how great the Andrew Garfield era of the Spider-Man suit was. I mean, it's definitely my favorite aesthetically.
It's a really good suit.
Huge eyes and a true DIY practicality to it. One thing that era nailed. But then Ned portals again, and Tobey Maguire Peter Parker.
But hold on, before we get into something, I really do feel like the new suit for Spider-Man is really good. Like the new one that Tom Holland makes it in the movie.
Parker steps in, his entrance set to Danny Elfman's Spider-Man theme. And we gotta credit both Maguire and Garfield for so deftly slipping back into their mannerisms. Tobey is preemptively polite and dopey. Andrew is post-mistake apologetic and super chatty. And I also like how their first instinct upon seeing each other is to whip attack, as if the last time either of these guys encountered a doppelganger, it might have been a hostile situation. Tobey Peter says that he liked to hang out atop the Chrysler building, as we saw his Peter perch in the Raimi films. Andrew Peter says he liked the Empire State Building for the view, but they find Peter on the rooftop of his school in Queens. It's not about the view, it's about a refuge from his high school life, because he never moved into the city. Andrew Peter starts to say he has some understanding of losing someone, of course referring to letting Gwen Stacy die, and he goes on to describe what happened
for letting Gwen Stacy die.
After Gwen's death, how he stopped pulling.
All right, that's probably gonna be like part 2 right there. But I don't know. This is good though, and I will continue with part 3 in like 5 seconds. 1,